Ya'at eshik aro shidane. Greetings, my relatives and my people. This is your host, Lila June, on Nihije, Our Voices, Indigenous Solutions podcast. And I'm joined today by my brother, my colleague, my homie who I've been working with for quite a few years now, Tall Paul, coming out of Minnesota from the Anishinaabe Nation. We're so happy to have you here. He's going to talk about his new album that just was released. And I kind of noticed as I was doing this podcast, like almost all of my interviewees are Native women. And I didn't even mean to do that. But I was just like, we need to start getting our brothers on here. And I couldn't think of a closer friend or like a role model that I would want to, share, especially now that your new album's out, just to celebrate that and just share not just about your album, but just your story. You have such a powerful story growing up in the urban setting of Minneapolis, and everything you've gone through in your life and overcome is just amazing. So let's just start out. What is your new album about?
Yeah, so my new album is about Jim Thorpe. He was, for those who don't know, he was a Native athlete, Olympic gold medalist in 1912, NFL Hall of Famer, Major League Baseball player, ballroom dance champion, pretty random. I read that he got offered a boxing contract for like $50,000. And this is back in the early 1900s when he wasn't even a boxer, just because of his celebrity and his stardom. So I think of him as being, in his time, kind of like the LeBron James, of back then. That's kind of the status he had back then, his superstar figure. So as a young athlete myself, when I was a kid and I learned about him, he was very inspirational for me, because I couldn't find that representation on the TV screen or on the radio from anybody else who was Native. I seen, a lot of other athletes of color, but just nobody who was Native. I didn't see him on the TV. It's a little bit more prevalent nowadays here in 2023, which is awesome. It's amazing. We're getting a lot more representation, but back in the 90s, it wasn't there as much. So I wanted to dedicate an album to him because of the way he inspired me throughout my life, especially my childhood, and just wanted more people to know about him, but also be empowered by his story. So yeah, my album's about Jim Thorpe, covered as much of him and his story as I could, from his birth and kind of the backdrop of the times he lived in all the way up to his passing and his legacy.
That's amazing. I mean, you hardly ever hear of biography albums, in general, much less a biography album about an Indigenous man, so it's so exciting to me. I almost want to I always tear up on my podcast. It's so beautiful what people are doing. But it's so exciting what you're doing, and to honor him in that way. And when was he around? When did he it was in the 40s or the 50s?
Yeah, so he was born roughly 1887, 1888, right around there, and then he passed in the 1950s. So, he was in his athletic prime and everything, probably like the teens, like the early 1900s through the 1920s is when he was an athlete. But, he passed in 1950 something.
And talk about representation being hard in the 90s more than now. Can you imagine in the teens, the types of ceilings he was breaking open when it was even harder than it is today? It's just phenomenal. And I know the creator put him here to help us out, so, okay. So what was the process like to see this whole album to completion? Did you have any obstacles? What was your hardest obstacle? Yeah. Just what was the process like for you?
Yeah, the process was interesting. It's not something I know that I'll ever put myself through again because it was very academic, but at the same time, maybe I will, because I feel like it led to a very powerful and unique project. Mm-hmm. But it was very academic. I felt like I was in college again. I had to do a lot of research, a lot of reading of books, a lot of watching of YouTube videos, watching hour-long documentaries and YouTube videos of people talking about him, historians like Robert Wheeler. Reading books, watching videos, watching documentaries, ordering DVDs, just doing a lot of research. I even got to the point where I got in contact with one of his last surviving son's caregiver. And
Damn.
I'm not sure if he's still with us now. This was a few years back. I tried to speak with him. I wasn't able to get in touch with him. It just fell through. I don't know if his son decided not to talk to me, or was just too busy, or not in good health, or what. But that fell through. I met with Martin Sensmeyer, who was originally supposed to play him in a film that was announced back in 2017, I believe. I'm not sure if that's still going to happen. I know the film is still happening. They announced
Yeah.
that recently. But yeah, the process was very academic. I felt like I was writing a college paper, almost several college papers. Like each song felt very academic, which for me took a little bit away from the creative juice, because
Mm.
when I write a song, you're just in the flow, you're in the inspiration, your pen's just moving. But
Yeah.
with something like this, you have to give a particular care to make sure that you're pronouncing things right, you're stating historical facts correctly, you're not misrepresenting his story. Yeah, it was very academic, but at the same time, it was an amazing experience, especially to be where I am now and it's out there in the world for people to hear. But yeah, very academic process, I would say.
Dang. And where can people find it?
They can find it at tallpaulhiphop.bandcamp.com, tallpaulhiphop.bandcamp.com, and also on all streaming services. If you look up Tall Paul and just Jim Thorpe, probably it'll pop up.
And the name of the album is Jim Thorpe, or is it?
It's the story of Jim Thorpe. Yeah, so if you want to type out the full album name, that'll definitely land you there. But yeah, even just I would imagine Tall Paul Jim Thorpe would blend the album. But yeah, the story of Jim Thorpe is the name of the album.
I mean, it's so amazing, that you took the time to craft this and that it took you so many years. Was it years or months?
Yeah, it took years. I would say, as far as actually doing the work, it was probably a matter of months, maybe a year. But a lot of that was just me taking breaks because of the just the mental hurdle of doing
Yeah.
something like this, doing something of this stature. I needed to
Yeah.
take breaks oftentimes. The inspiration would come and go. Didn't want to force it. So yeah, there were times where I'll take months off from researching and writing, and then I'd get back to it, and it just kind of went in cycles like that over the course of 5 years until I finally completed it.
Yeah, I really encourage everyone out there, if you have a road trip coming up or you just going on a run or whatever, like look up on Spotify the story of Jim Thorpe and check out this incredible biography album by our brother here, Tall Paul, who's been in the hip hop game for a long time and is an incredible hip hop artist. I have the honor of performing beside you every now and then when we get to cross paths on the stage. But yeah, I really encourage you guys to check out the album because it's gonna teach you about this man, this ancestor who really had so much to teach us and as Native people and as people in general, ballroom dance champion, like he was in the NFL Hall of Famer, he was so darn good at any sport he touched. But what I've found with athletes, and I'm not usually a sports person, but in order to finish my PhD dissertation, I had to watch basketball interviews with basketball players because athletes have to tap into something that could benefit non-athletes as well, because athletes have to tap into their drive, they have to tap into their dedication, they have to find willpower, they have to find consistency, right? To go back to the gym or the whatever sport you're playing every day and practice and work towards a goal. I think that can be applied to anything. So I was listening to interviews with Michael Jordan, Steph Curry, other basketball greats, and that is literally what helped me get to the finish line of my PhD, which I just finished last month. Without them, I'm not sure if I could have done it. So I think this album is not just for sports fanatics, it's for anyone who wants to take this one life that we've been given and just knock it out of the park, to kick some butt, take some names in your life. So what is it like for you being like a native hip hop artist? Do you have to go through certain things that non-native hip hop artists don't have to go through? Like, do you have certain advantages that other types hip hop artists don't have? Like, what has your experience been, in the hip hop world and being a native artist?
Yeah, I think it comes with, some ups and downs, especially when I was first starting out and not as many people were aware of me. People would say, "Oh, you rap," and they would just like, they would kind of look doubtful. They've never seen a native rapper before, so they'd be like, "Okay, can he really rap, or is he just saying he can rap?" You get on stage and you rap, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, he can rap." So it's kind of like you gotta prove yourself a little more. That's been my experience. I feel like you gotta prove yourself a little more. You have a little bit more hurdles and doubts to overcome from outside people because they've never seen a native rapper, so they think you're just not gonna be as talented as you are or whatnot.
Right.
On the flip side, I do find that, I'm blessed to have certain opportunities just to be able to perform in tribal communities.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily know that I would say that that's an advantage or not, but, it's just an avenue that we have to connect with our communities more intently and yeah, in a more focused manner. But yeah, being a native hip hop artist, for me, I just feel like it's just an extension of who I am. I'm a hip hop artist who happens to be native, is the way I like to put it. And because I'm native, I speak on my identity and my upbringing, my culture, my lack of having it as a young kid. All of these things are important to who I am as a person. So therefore, that native hip hop artist comes out of me naturally. So that's how I think of it. Is I'm a hip hop artist who happens to be native, and therefore you're going to hear my native perspectives and ideologies in my music.
Right. Yeah. And I think, and then you have the urban experience too. What it like, I know that's a huge question, but I think the statistic is like 70% of Native people live in urban settings, or maybe even more. But like the majority of us are now in the cities, enrolled tribal members are in the cities. Like, what is it like, growing up away from your homeland and in these cities? Like, what are the pros and cons of that, would you say?
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure exactly the stat, but that's something I heard too, is that most natives live in urban settings. And from a hip hop standpoint, I feel like that empowers our voice, if anything, because now not only can we relate to natives, but we also relate to anybody living in an urban setting. There are people who are not native who can still relate to my music and, vibe with it because they're like, oh, okay, I grew up much like you did, how you talk about growing up in your songs. I had similar experiences. Just like maybe mixed African American people saying, oh, I've dealt with some of the same things you've dealt with, not having your culture, growing up, not feeling native because your culture is not present. Well, I often feel like I'm not fully accepted on either side of my family because I'm not enough white or I'm not enough black and so on, So your story can kind of vibe with other people in different ways. So I think
Mhm.
that growing up in an urban setting makes my story more relatable oftentimes. Not that a res rapper or somebody from the res can't also relate, but yeah, it's just I've found that there's more commonality than there is difference.
Yeah, I feel you. Um, it's interesting, like the urban setting, you have a little bit direct connection to quote unquote mainstream culture, so you can influence how we're represented in the world, a little more directly, perhaps. Um, but then on the other side, you're not able to get like close to the land, and because I've been in Albuquerque off and on for the past few years, and Albuquerque's amazing, but it's super urban, and it's like I don't get to be close to like the animals and the plants of my ancestors always. But now I just moved to like a little bit more rural area and I got my sheep. I have 16 of our endangered sheep. And it's amazing how time has slowed down. I didn't like my elders were like, yeah, just get some sheep, just trust us. You'll see why. And I'm like, okay, I'll get some sheep. I don't really I'm still figuring out like why am I getting sheep? But now that I'm with the sheep, I'm like, oh, like I'm noticing things I didn't even know that I needed. Like just slowing down and being with them and seeing how they move and having to feed them every single day. But I think like you said, there's we gotta bring our heart to every single context that we find ourselves in. We gotta bring our spirit, and we need everyone. We need every single piece of the puzzle. People in the urban settings, people on the land, um, and you could do both too. You could do both, and that's really important too. Um, and so we're gonna play some of Paul's music at the end of this podcast, so definitely like stick to the end because we're gonna play one of the songs. Um, but you've, in addition to being a hip hop artist, you've just lived an incredible life that I've had the honor of learning a little bit about. You've overcome. I mean, Native men, Native women have crazy shit to deal with, crazy stuff to deal with. Excuse my language, but Native men have this whole other set of hurdles, and I mean, I can only imagine. Like, so what has been the most helpful thing you've had happen to you in your life to help you through your personal development as a Native man? Like, what are the things that helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The first thing that comes to mind, honestly, is I feel like my hardest times are my best teachers. So
Hmm.
anytime I go through something that is hard and difficult, I come out of it better and more improved and more equipped to deal with that kind of situation in the future. My struggle with alcohol, obviously that was a choice to get engaged with that spirit and become. It wasn't a choice to become addicted, but it was a choice to pick it up in the first place as a very young kid who's trying to kind of escape his reality at the time.
Yeah.
But that was one of the struggles that taught me a lot about myself. Going through that and seeing what it did to me, and then being able to come out of that intact now and almost 13 years sober. It empowered me, and I'm glad I went through it as early as I did because my son, he never had to see me deal with bottles or any of that kind of stuff. My son has never had to deal with seeing me intoxicated. He's never had to see me that way. And
Hmm.
now that's a story I get to pass on to others is, talking about my sobriety and not only my sobriety, but the importance of finding connection in my sobriety,
Hmm.
finding purpose that keeps me driven and keeps me away from using and things like that. Being able to be of service to the community, going to treatment centers and sharing my story, being inspiring as an artist and public speaker, just finding ways to empower others through what I like to do with my life, my passions. Um, I would say hard times teach me the most and make me the strongest. Making poor decisions. I feel like so much of it is self-inflicted. I almost got kicked out of college, and then that experience is like, oh, okay, like college, this can be taken from me. So I got serious, and that was around the time I got sober. And next thing you know, I made the dean's list 3 times throughout my last 2 years of college, and I graduated with a 3.27 GPA. Where in high school I wasn't doing so well. I think I graduated with a 1.96 GPA, but I knew I was smarter than that. I
Yeah.
just was not applying myself. So I've learned the most from my mistakes, and I also have to give credit though to like my support system, whether it's sobriety or my education. I remember being at South High, Minneapolis. There was a couple ladies who helped me a lot, Eva Newbeck and Patty Blado. There were counselors of mine who really cared about me. Um, they would always ask me how I'm doing in school, and they're one of the bright spots of me being at school because I didn't like being at school at that time in my life as a ninth, 10th,
Yeah.
11th grader making mistakes. So I would say, support systems were the most helpful for me from a, outside support, helping me out kind of standpoint. They believed in me. Finding people like that is imperative. I had a similar person at the University of Minnesota by the name of Jillian Rowan. Used to consider her kind of like my mom away from home. Um, she helped me get my first job in college, helped me study, helped me really held my hand basically throughout my college experience, being in one of the biggest campuses in the U.S. as a Native person and finding the Native community there, so it felt smaller to me. Uh,
Hmm.
so I say support systems are major for me. Just finding people who care, that's a big one. And then it was the same for sobriety. going to sober meetings, and then getting in touch with the people who I could see had figured it out, who had figured out their sobriety and their connection. And I could tell just by the way they talked and walked and behaved that they were for real about their sobriety and being helpful to others. Being able to see that and then ask for help and get that help was major. That's when I realized, like, oh, okay, I can't just be sober. I can't just like put stuff down and stop using it. I also have to use that sobriety to be a positive force in the world.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, oh, well, you should come to these treatment centers with us and share your story. We bet you can empower somebody else with
Yeah.
your story, just like you feel we've done for you. So I'll
Mhm.
do that. And then that was the most powerful thing for me, to be honest, is being of service to others. I was like, okay, I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe like my story could be impactful for someone else. But then, you get numerous people hearing my story at these treatment centers and then coming up to me asking me for my contact information and can they stay in touch with me and ask me for help. I was like, oh wow, I do got something to offer, and that's when I'm new in sobriety. That empowered me. So those are some of the things that were most helpful for me was support systems, I would say. And then, just encountering hard times. Hard times always teach the best lessons in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, like your story on one hand is like being loved, by these key people who were there who just gave a, what about, people, but then also loving, not just being loved, but then being honored to be able to then help others, like to love and be loved, is like such a powerful stepping stones on like how we get through this life. And I think it's true, like when I was getting sober, I was drunk from like age 12 to age 23. And I'm 33 now. So like, yeah, like, but it was service to others, like you said, that really like amped it up and gave me like purpose. I think like at the end of the day, we all need purpose. And even
Mhm.
now, my 99-year-old grandma, she's having a hard time because like she wants to be here, but she doesn't know why, And so lately we've been going to her brother's house, who's 93, and just showing him love, taking him stuff, and that keeps her spirit here because she knows she has a purpose. But the moment she's starting to go blind, she's starting to wonder like, well, creator, how am I supposed to, like, why am I here? And I think that's true whether you're 99 or you're a 16-year-old kid in high school. Like, why am I here? And once you realize you can effectuate change, which each and every one of us can, then it's like, oh shoot, that's why I can change this thing. I can change the world. So yeah, I really feel you on that. And I think too, like your story just highlights how important it is to be there for youth, for those in addiction, because it was just a few key people that gave you just enough of a foothold to keep going. And so we think our actions might be small, but they're actually could be doing for others what those people did for you, which is like giving you that little leg up that you needed to get to where you are today. So never for a moment doubt like your actions could really, really be helping someone's journey. And I need to take that advice too. So yeah, like, you know, I have a million questions for you, but you know, as a what was your experience like, growing up and finding your native identity? I know a lot of us struggle with that across the spectrum. Everyone thinks, oh, those people are so secure in their native identity, not realizing that like almost all native people have had to struggle, and not like no matter what race you are, of like your cultural identity is such a intense question, like, but I think so many of us native folks have our own journeys of like feeling native, if you will, or feeling native enough, or just knowing who we are. Like, could you shine some light on what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, yeah. So, they talk about the boarding schools and the process of assimilation and it's stripping us of our cultures and languages. And I could say, growing up in my childhood, I can tell looking back in retrospect that that process was successful with my family for sure.
Mm-hmm.
because there was nobody in my household speaking the language or practicing the language. Like I don't even remember smudging in my house. Um, my
Mm-hmm.
grandma took us to church a few times, I believe. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, when I was growing up as a kid and I started to understand, like, okay, I'm quote unquote Native American, I'm Ojibwe. I had these questions like, what does that mean though? Like, I can see I'm brown and whatever, but what does it mean to be Native? And I eventually got to go to this Native magnet school called Four Winds. A guy by the name of Rick Greshik will come in and tell us our origin stories, our creation stories, just stories about Wayne Buju, and that would teach us these different morals and values that we are supposed to take away from the stories. But he did so in a very entertaining way. And he also taught us a little bit of the language. That's when I started to understand, like, oh, okay, so these are the things that make us Native. It's about, our culture. It's about our language. It's about having those teachings that I hadn't had up to that point. And this was about fourth grade when I first started kind of getting exposed to this stuff.
Yeah.
And then, you know, still, being so new to it, there would be times when we'd be at like a community feast, or we would go to these different churches where they would give out free community meals. My grandma would like load us all into the van. We'd go to these different churches in South Minneapolis that would do free food on certain days and times for the community, so she could save money and probably also save herself the stress of cooking for us all the time.
Yeah.
And one time anyway, they were serving wild rice, and it was wild rice, which is a traditional food of ours. And there was another native elder there, and he seen me skip over the wild rice. He was like, "Oh, you don't like wild rice?" I said, "What kind of Indian are you?" He said it in a playful way. I'm sure he just was joking with me. But as a young, impressionable kid who was struggling with his native identity, I took it almost personally. I was like, dang, like that's bogus. He said that. I took it seriously. So it made me feel like I was less native. So then that kind of reminded me of that gap that needed to be bridged with my identity. And so it was a lifelong process all the way up until about college. When I got into college, that's when I really got to bridge that gap, because I was able to take a consistent, serious, legitimate Ojibwe language class from an instructor who was fluent in the language and also taught us the language and the culture, because you can't really have the language without the culture and vice versa. There's so many cultural teachings wrapped into, just the different word parts of one word, even that cannot translate directly to English. And he would, invite us to his own house to, feast spiritual items, whether it's an eagle feather or whatever. And that's when that gap was really able to be closed, when I was in college. And having somebody like that to teach me about our culture and the language, I was like, okay, cool. This is what it is to be Ojibwe. This is what it is to be Anishinaabe. Understanding our teachings and the importance of our language. And then that's how my song "Prayers in a Song" came about, because I went back to my childhood with that one. I was like, okay, had I had something like this that I could relate to as a young inner city hip hop fan who happened to who is native, maybe the language and culture would have been more interesting to me as a young kid. Maybe I would have sought out ways to learn the language, or been more interested in learning it. So I just wanted to kind of make that connection back to the youth with that song, make the language and culture more entertaining and relatable for them, because it's not always taught in the most relatable way to the youth, in my experience anyway. But yeah, so that was kind of my experience pretty much, growing up feeling like this gap needed to be bridged within my native identity,
Mm-hmm.
and then ultimately getting to that point of finally closing that gap in my college years, having a language and culture teacher who helped out a lot with that.
Yeah. And if you haven't heard that song, go on YouTube, look up Prayers in a Song, Tall Paul. And it's a gorgeous, beautiful, important song that, really made some waves when it came out, and really was one more, drop in the bucket of the wave of Indigenous Renaissance that has been going on for a long time. And it's really important song. Here's another question. Like, what do you think it would have been like if you didn't have that person come in fourth grade, if you didn't have that guide with the wild rice thing, which sounded like it hurt, but maybe one positive side of it was it reminded you of like, oh, this hurts, uh, I think he could have said something differently that was more constructive. But anyways, what if you never had those language classes? Like where do you think you would be now if you didn't have those things?
Yes, that's tough to imagine. I'm not positive. I feel like I feel like back then I'd probably be still seeking it out if I didn't find it at the time, because I feel like that gap was just there. And it originally was there out of my own curiosity, because my family would tell me, "Oh, you're Ojibwe." My brothers were Ojibwe in Dakota. Um, I heard enough about us being native that it made me curious about what it meant to be native. So I feel like my curiosity would have still driven me to go seek that out and find
Yeah.
it one way or the other. But yeah, so I feel
Or
like,
maybe a better way to ask the question is like, what did those things give you that if you didn't have them, you wouldn't have right now? Like what kind of nourishment did that stuff provide and how is it helping you today?
oh yeah, no, that's yeah, when you frame it that way, um, it'd be much like, it'd be, operating in this white man's world without my identity and not really knowing where I fit in, being lost almost, I'd be lost in a major way had I not had those teachings, trying to fit into this society without my roots. And, it's kind of like, imagine a tree, staying alive without its roots or something like that and being nourished. Like it's not possible. So I feel like that gap would be there and I'd be unhealthy. I probably wouldn't be who I am today. Kind of trying to be a force for empowerment in the community and in the world. Yeah, I feel like I'd be lost in a big way without those teachings and that connection.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what our past generations had to go through. Our parents' generations, our grandparents' generations, to some extent, our great grandparents' generations. Like a lot of them had that root taken out of them, and I hear this story time and time again in different forms. Like either people are feeling not connected enough, or they're just so darn grateful that they are connected. Like even my auntie, she's through and through full blood Navajo, and she married a Navajo cowboy, has beautiful Navajo children, and even she feels like I don't feel enough, I wish I knew the language. I wish I when I go home, I feel like an outsider, and I'm like, dang, if you feel like an outsider, then I definitely feel like one. But it's just, but what's funny is we're all insiders. We're all part of this web. We can't help it. We're part of this web of ancestors and descendants. And no matter what amount of knowledge we have of the language or the culture, we're all still part of this story. And we all are on that road back home, like you were, getting home. And um, what would what do you think? How do you think it might be? I know this is a tough question, but like for people who aren't native, who are trying to find their identity, whether it's Black folks or white folks or Asian folks who come here and have to figure stuff out, how do you think this stuff applies to their cultural context?
Yeah, I feel like, there's like you see a lot about, natives trying to reconnect nowadays. I feel like it would be similar to that, I imagine, just like I imagine, putting myself in the shoes of, say, maybe a native person who was adopted by a non-native family far away from any kind of tribal communities or anything. Um, yeah, that's got to be tough, seeking out that connection and trying to find those roots. I imagine it's got to be hard, and I always try to have empathy for people in that situation, and I consider myself lucky to, have, even though I didn't grow up with the language and the culture, I did grow up with my native family, and that enabled me to later on in life make those connections that helped bridge that gap. So yeah, I have empathy for those people, and anytime people in that situation ask me for advice, it's like I don't always know if I have the best advice. It's like I'm like, man, just keep reaching out, keep asking questions, keep going asking questions, and asking for advice. Trying to find those connections that can lead you back to who you are. That's oftentimes the best I can do, because I haven't been in that particular situation where it almost, in my imagination, feels like it probably feels impossible to them to reconnect and make those connections. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes it does. And then on top of that, America, as it were, gives you like surrogate roots, like alternative roots, like your roots are now capitalism. This is your new identity, this is your new culture. Or your roots are now whatever it is. It's almost like a a substitute, um, which is not bad per se, because we all need something to hang on to. But like, I feel like it's so easy to get absorbed in that substitute identity, and like you said, it feels so like our brothers and sisters from who were trafficked here from Africa, and in this human trafficking trade that was awful, and disgusting, were intentionally and systematically disconnected from their native roots. I heard they used to jumble people up. Like from West Africa, they would like jumble people up with different tribes so that they couldn't communicate, so that when they got to these places where they were being trafficked, it was hard to talk to their people, because they would have their cultures jumbled up. They don't know which tribe they came from, which nation, and they came from these amazing civilizations, right? Who were just like thriving, and then all that got like lost on them. And then I even heard that like they had their instruments taken away, like that they noticed that the people who were trafficked here, they call it slavery, but I call it just, all the language or that talks around like slavery is like so serving the white supremacism, but the trafficking, like they took away their instruments, their drums or what have you, because they noticed it was gathering the people up and giving them power and giving them something to hold on to. So that's how tap dancing was invented, because like they're like, okay, you take away our instruments, we're going to use our feet, and so like, but all that was, they had to fight for all that, like every single shred of connection to who they were. And it's brutal, like it's like the boarding schools, but like this many other layers of abuse. And then you have Euro Americans, who I'm one of them on my dad's side. I'm Euro American, and we have had our identity, buried under thousands of years of, Roman expansion and inquisitions and witch burnings, and like just thousands of years of violence that destroyed all these druidic pagan cultures in Europe. Even the word Europe is a Greco-Roman word, from these Greco-Roman colonizers who took over this whole continent of what we now call Europe. And that has many other names besides Europe from these indigenous languages. But anyways, I'm kind of waxing philosophical and talking too much as I do. But I think it's important for all of us to question, like you said, to question who are we, where are we from, and how is this American system robbing us of our true roots and giving us this little substitute that's like never ever going to be as good as who we really, really are. And we can find those roots. It's not impossible. If I can find my Scottish, European, indigenous roots, then there's hope for the rest of us too, because there's some like it shouldn't even survive, but it does. It's out there, But anyways, let's close just by saying, like, if you're open to it, like I'm an indigenous woman, right? I have to deal with the gender violence. I have to deal with sexism and racism all in one, and colonialism, blah blah blah. But like, what do Native men or men in general have to confront, do you think? Like, what is the medicine that has helped you as a man? What are the challenges you've had to confront as a man? And what do you think are the things that can help people through that journey?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that comes to mind on that topic is like the colonialism and boys can't cry kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
the
Patriarchy.
yeah, like the hyper masculinity, or like, boys can't show emotion, boys can't be nurturing. That kind of thing is one of the big things I feel like I've faced in my life, and I still deal with to this day. Um, just like those expectations, like, a man is a man does this and, not this other stuff. And I've had to, I feel like part of the breaking of the cycle and overcoming that is making sure to teach my son different. Like, you're no less of a man if you express emotion, or if you have tears about something. Like, that does not make you less of a man. If anything, it makes you more powerful, and because it makes you healthier. And the healthier of a person you are, whether you're a man or not, the better you're going to be for, any significant other, your community, your family. So that's what I focus on, is try to be more caring with my son, because I
Hmm.
had minimal experience with my dad, but those were kind of like the teachings my dad gave me when I did meet him, was like, boys ain't soft. And then society and the TV is teaching you that same thing. The kids in the neighborhood, their dads are teaching you the same thing. Like, boys are hard, we don't cry. And then you get all this internalized frustration and anger and things like that. And it comes out as anger because you don't know how else to express it, because you're taught not to express it differently than that. So, football and things like that were my outlets and stuff. So
Hmm.
with my son and my boys, I just try to teach them, like, it's okay. It's okay to have feelings. It's okay to cry. It's okay to, be emotional at times, and express yourself, to be honest about how you feel. That's just what I try to focus on in the standpoint of just breaking the cycle, so that doesn't continue down, at least with my kids,
Hmm.
and so that's how I combat that. And then I also, look inward and try to, it's harder. It's more difficult for me to beat those things myself, because it's ingrained in me already,
Hmm.
So, like, not that it's intentional or anything, but it's like I can't remember the last time I cried or anything like that. There'll be times where I feel like I want to cry, and it's like almost like my body doesn't know how to. That's like how deep it is.
Yeah.
And, and that sucks, you know what I mean? But
Hmm.
yeah, so I just try to, and I'll talk about that kind of stuff with them too, just, yeah, just being open about it and not spreading those false teachings of, men don't cry and so on. Um, at the same time, I try to teach them, like, it is also, it is also healthy. Like, there's nothing wrong with being physically strong, or, wanting to play football or something like that, because we also need to have healthy ways to express our what is it, our adrenaline or whatnot, our need for adventure and things like that, so, like, I mean, I participated in sports. They actually both decided upon themselves they wanted to be in boxing, and that's actually one of the most powerful things. It's like it's like you see healthy masculinity, um seeing, two boys get in the ring with each other and duke it out. And then afterward, they're giving each other hugs and high fives, like, good job, bro, good job, talking to the other coaches. And it's not about like talking down on each other, but it's about helping each other get better. Whether they're sparring or at competitions. I've noticed in boxing matches, and I've known this, it's just there's a lot of sportsmanship, and it's a lot about youth development. And it's not just about the sport, it's about teaching them discipline, teaching them respect for women, teaching them to be protectors and things like that. So, yeah, I feel like there's so much to unpack on that topic, but I
Yeah.
just do my best as a father. And then I try to put them in environments where they can also learn the best lessons from other people who can teach them things that I can't teach them, making sure they're around women, who can teach them about the importance of having respect for women, and they're around people who can teach them different perspectives and things. I feel like that's one of the most important things as a caretaker, is to not limit not limit them to only learning from me,
Yeah.
exposing them to new environments and new situations. That's what I do. But yeah, it's a lot. I feel like there's so much to talk about there.
I know so it's like a huge like, and it's funny too for those of you who can't see the video. Paul is like holding like a puppy right now, like, and I feel like that's a perfect like metaphor for what you're talking about. Because your name's Tall Paul because you're like a tall guy. You're like a big, strong, masculine dude, and you have so much power and strength, and you can like hold a puppy at the same time. Like
Yeah.
to have that duality of like that emotional nurturer and that strong protector. I think you can absolutely do both. And I think as women, sometimes we have to do both too. And, but yeah, I think that just what's fascinating too is I think maybe men think that women like the hard, strong, buff guy, but actually, at least in my experience, I could be wrong, but we like it when men are soft sometimes and they're emotional and they cry for us. Like, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I don't think I am. I think we love when men trust us enough to cry with us. Like, it honors us as women and it makes us feel safe and it makes us feel like we're with a real human, and like we know that he has enough humility and also courage to cry, and also I don't know what the word is. I want to say like softness, but that's not quite the right word. Like enough um humanity, I guess, to cry. And I think that what I was told by one of my elders is that he said, actually, American culture has it all wrong. They think women are more emotional than men. He's like, no, men are more emotional than women. They have to deal with this turbulence, this freaking testosterone and God knows what. I don't even know what you guys go through, but like so much intense stuff going on inside you all the time. But then the society gives you fewer and fewer places to express it, to even just feel it in the first place. And so he said, we're taking the part of society that has the most to feel and giving the least amount of space. And then we wonder, like you said, why do people have these outbursts? Why are they so violent? Why are blah, blah, blah? And it's like, if we could just open some of that pressure valve and give them space to like emote, to cry, to even express anger and be like, hey, this is freaking me out, or this is upsetting me, or this is making me sad, or this is making me happy. Like, then we could let that pressure out in a more healthy way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely, felt a lot of those feelings of just having it kind of boxed in and not having a way to let it out in a healthy manner. And I see it in youth today, yeah, just they wear their just like I did, we wore our fear with the mean mug, you know what I mean? We put up a brick wall and look stoic and angry and dangerous because we don't want to let nobody in. That's kind of what it is, and I just do my best. I focus on healing that at home first and foremost. And then anytime, I'm able to do youth workshops and things like that, just try to be conscious of how I'm presenting myself and carrying myself. It's hard to get away from the fact that I'm, 6'3", 240 or whatever, so that physical presence oftentimes presents a challenge for me to get over, as far as like presenting myself in a friendly way. Like I'll always be friendly and everything, but not everybody is gonna get that immediate impression of me because I'm a big dude, so that's something that I have to get over. That's like a hurdle I constantly deal with, is just like making sure like, okay, let me be hyper intentional about being very kind and like soft spoken or whatever it might be in that scenario, to make sure that these youth or this community understands that I'm a cool person.
Yeah, you have to battle that stereotype, right? Of like, oh, big, tall, brown man, like which is messed up that you even have to battle that. But like people have these assumptions of your character before you even. But like, yeah, I'm just so I've seen you speak to the audience. I've seen you speak to youth, and it's so powerful. I always like cry pretty much every single time because you do bring so much heart and so much emotion and gentleness, like, and put all that power that you've been gifted with behind that, and I think your son is very lucky to have you as a father to tell him like, hey, it's okay to cry, like what percentage of young men are told that? Probably like 20%, if that, like, and I think it's just inspiring, what we can do as women too, as women, like what do you think we could do to support men's healing? Like, do you feel like that's even our role, or like, could we? Is there something we could do different in general to kind of support? I don't know, just like healthy masculinity,
Oh man, that's tough. That's tough. Yeah, that's hard. That's difficult.
Yeah,
I'm not sure, like I guess I can't say for certain.
yeah,
I know like, because I was raised by women, you know what I mean? So like all my experiences mostly came from women, whether it was, the nurturing, loving side or the toxic side. I got it all from women,
mm-hmm,
for better or worse. My dad was around briefly at different spots, and that was pretty much only a negative experience. There wasn't really any nourishment or nurturing from him.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, that's a tough one. I feel like we're all battling this together, though. You know what I mean? Like I feel
yeah,
like we got to help each other. Whether it's women helping women, women helping men, men helping women, men helping men. It's definitely something for us all to take on together, because I feel like we're all facing the same monster essentially, but in our own ways that are unique to us in the way we're presented in this world, whether that's as a man, a woman, or a native, a white person, whatever the case may be.
yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, no, it's like you said, a lot of men feel like, oh, okay, women like the bad boy, or we're taught that, or even there are times when women will say, or they'll give us the impression like, oh, I don't want no soft man or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like every woman's different, just like every man's different. So
yeah.
I don't know if that is necessarily a woman's job to help us or not, but I feel like we all need to just help each other as best as we can.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thanks for fielding these like really intense questions, but I think they're important to, even if we can't answer them right now, like, or even if we can partially answer them, there's just so important for the healing of ourselves and our communities. And but yeah, I think, you're coming full circle back to your album, just, Jim Thorpe as a Native man, giving inspiration to other Native men. And I know that you are doing that all the time for not just Native men, but just people in general. And, is there anything like lastly you want to share with people about the album, about your music, about, anything at all? I know you're like, you're kind of like Jim Thorpe. You have your hand in a lot of different pots, like you do a lot of financial liberation stuff for the Native community. You do a lot of like safety trainings. You do like music. You speak in treatment centers. So I know your mind is like, a very versatile, like multifaceted mind. So like, is there any last words you want to share with people about literally anything before we jump off? And just thank you again for your time.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, service, finding ways to add value to other people's lives. I know for me, when I was struggling, that was the biggest thing that helped me out of my own problems, was helping other people with their problems. Helping other people with their problems and being of service to them with no expectation of anything in return actually brought me the biggest return, which was like a new sense of peace of mind and purpose. So I'd say if you can be of service and do something meaningful for other people or communities or an organization, whatever, I'll definitely encourage that. And then also another big one is, trying to learn forgiveness. And even though I've learned about forgiveness and what it truly means, and to forgive someone, I still struggle with it. But just to have that knowledge is a major advantage. Not, I don't want to say advantage. It's a major learning and stepping stone to understand forgiveness. And the way I was taught what forgiveness is it's not brushing it off as if it didn't happen. It's not forgetting it. It's not saying, oh, okay, you're going to give them a pass. Real forgiveness is about overlooking their error, because I understand that we all came into this world, into this, earthly realm as these pure spirits and these babies who had nothing but goodness in them. And then this world turned us very much into what we became. So if I understand from that perspective and point of view,
Yeah.
I can look at somebody like my dad. Like my dad wasn't born as, an inmate. He wasn't born as somebody who was abusive or, neglectful. He was born into this world in a tough situation where he was mistreated, neglected, abused, rejected by his own father, and things like that. So then he became that. Now, that's not making an excuse from him, because he could have just as well took that as motivation to be better and to heal. But it's to say that he processed it differently, and I can forgive him because I know that that's not who he is in truth. So I'll say the two big things for me are learning forgiveness and being able to use it, and then learning what it means to be of service to others and really experience the impact of that and the purpose that it brings.
Damn. Well, you honor the ancestors very well, and I'm honored to walk with you in this journey. Go check out The Story of Jim Thorpe, just released biography album of Jim Thorpe by Tall Paul. Go to tallpaulhiphop.bandcamp.com to see all of his other amazing songs on YouTube, Spotify, all the streaming platforms. And just keep an eye on this guy. He's amazing. He's just going to keep on doing awesome stuff. So keep an eye on. Oh, what's your Instagram real quick? Is it Tall Paul Hip Hop?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Tall Paul Hip Hop.
Yeah, this is Instagram. So go follow him there. And we'll close out with one of your songs. Thanks for being here, brother. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Miguel.